Well, welcome back. Today, I intend to bring to a close a conversation that I began some sessions ago, where I started to address the power and the impact of a female's self-image and beauty, both on the woman but also on the man. And over the last few sessions, I have covered different parts of what I think is a very complicated and in many ways nuanced topic. I intend to bring that to a close today so I can move on to some more important and, quite frankly, rather more interesting topics. Let me begin today's session with a trip down memory lane by sharing a personal experience I had. This is back in my 20s. I worked for a very, very well-respected, large consultancy company. And I had just been given the opportunity to work on a large hotel project with a developer. Before myself, there was another engineer who had managed a very, very, and successfully so, a very large hotel project. In this case, the hotel in question was one that I had, towards the end of the project, got involved with. Now on one of the occasions, I remember very vividly, we'd finished the hotel. Usually we have what we call a soft landing. And this is where the hotel is completed and you need to run the hotel in as 100% capacity as you can as a way of simulating real occupancy once the hotel is open for business. The idea here is that 2 weeks before you go live, you get everything operating, the rooms occupied, the spa areas working, the swimming pools in operation, the restaurants capable of catering for peak demand. The reason is you're doing what we call a dry run. You're trying to identify teething issues, areas that were overlooked in terms of managerial or operational performance, and you wanted to make sure that everything that had been designed, the interior design, the architecture, the engineering, the logistics, the presentation, that everything would come together seamlessly on opening day. Now, I should also state this was a 5-star hotel, one of the biggest 5-star hotels in London, and therefore it was well anticipated. Now, as part of the design team, we were invited to stay over at the hotel for the weekend, because that weekend was meant to be a soft landing experience, a soft landing exercise. The client, the developers, the managers, the engineers, the architects, everyone was invited, in addition to guests. Now, these guests were specifically selected by the development team. These were people that were there to experience the hotel, but they were not the public. Now, I arrived for the weekend, and I was accompanied by a very, very attractive lady, young lady. Now, this was in my 20s. In my 20s, I would rather, might even say cavalier about certain things. I was young and I was brash and I was quite interested. In any case, I noticed for the first time the importance and the power of a female's presence, and the importance of and the power of beauty. Now, I had dated women who were more attractive in the past, but this was the first time that I had brought someone to a business function, which is what it was, and they were going to meet people that I associated with professionally. My bosses were there. The client was there. All of the directors across the various firms were there. They came with their partners. They came with their wives. Some came with the family. Now, when I arrived, I noticed a sudden change. I had appeared in one or two meetings before this particular project, and before the opening, and I met the client, I met the project managers. However, when I arrived and I walked in to the hotel and I checked in and came down for dinner, something interesting happened. We came down, we went down to the restaurant, I exchanged greetings with the people that I knew. I could see my boss, I could see my client, I could see the project managers, I could see the development team, I could see the consultants, the architects, everyone was there. They were all seated. In many ways in a hierarchical configuration. So the client had on his table those who were the closest to him, and then further down you had people who were perhaps not intrinsically connected to the project or to the client. Now, as you would imagine, I walked up to every single one of the important people and I introduced myself and expressed how fabulous the hotel looked. And of course, I had someone on my arm and I introduced the lady who I was dating at the time. And there was a sudden shift. I was asked to come and sit on the client's table. That was surprising because there were people who were much senior to myself who were turned down from being on that table. Now it wasn't about me. The point was that her beauty, her presence, her aura, her mannerism changed the environment. Now, in many cases and in many ways, some of the men I'm referring to were in their 50s, late 40s, 60s. Now, I was in my 20s. The lady I was with was quite young. However, I could see in their eyes almost the reverence. The look that an old man gives to a young man when he says, "Yeah, I wish I could play that game. I used to play that game back in the day, and I acknowledge your presence. You've got game." Something strange happened. We stayed for the weekend. The next week, I was invited to a meeting with the same client. Now, recognize that on this project that had just been completed, I was the junior engineer on the project in my consultancy firm. There was someone who was senior to me. There was a senior and there was a junior. In any case, I was invited. The senior who was there at the time was not invited for the meeting. In the meeting, he expressed that he had a new project that he wanted me to oversee. Now, this was strange. I was still relatively young. My experience was limited. But as you can imagine, I had no intentions of saying no. So I accepted. And I noticed within the company, suddenly the calls were coming to me. And most of the time, the calls were not going to my overall operations director. It was coming to me first. And then I had to pass the information to him. Now, to cut the long story short, I ended up working on more than 4 new exquisite hotel projects after that project. And strangely speaking, the original person who was senior to me on the project did not work on any of the other projects. In many ways, I was promoted. I did get a promotion. The person who was above me at the time requested for a promotion and was denied. The point being that I found favor. For some strange reason, I found favor in the eyes of the client and his team, strangely. Now let me say this very, very honestly. this had very little to do with my competence. Although I will not be bashful about my competence, but at the time, I was relatively, I had limited experience in such huge projects. Now, I'm talking about in the hundreds of millions of pounds. Some of these schemes, these were huge projects. Meetings I would go to, and I would be the youngest person in the meeting. I had people to my left and to my right who had been in the industry for 30 years. And here I was, I'd been in the industry for less than 5 years. And I'd been pushed up to a position of influence and power and authority, and therefore good standing. And that changed my entire career going forward. Now, the good thing was I was willing to work hard, because with great power comes great responsibility. And that was something I was happy to live into. It was always a dream. Just like Arnold Schwarzenegger once said, they said, how could you have achieved all of this success? You've come from Austria. You couldn't speak the English language. You've arrived here. You became a 7-time bodybuilding champion. You become a 2-time governor. You even ran for president. How did you achieve all of this success? And he said, I created a vision in my mind of who I wanted to become. And then every single day I lived into that vision. Now, in my case, this was no different. I always had a vision of being in that position. I had set myself a timeline of at least 10 years, 15, to be more realistic. And in less than 5 years, I had achieved that dream. Partly speaking, the opportunity came based on how I was perceived within the group. Now, rightly or wrongly, the group perceived me to be one that they could be trusted, and one to be trusted, one to be introduced or welcomed into the pack. Did I deserve it? I think so, but I only say so in hindsight. At the time, I hadn't qualified to be there. The point I'm making is sometimes opportunities come and you take them. But it would be remiss of me to say that that opportunity was not influenced by the beauty I had on my arm. Beauty matters. Now we know of Helen of Troy. We know of the Queen of Sheba. From the books of antiquities, we know of men who have made decisions that are logically unsound because of the influence of a woman's beauty or a woman's presence. Image matters. So, for those who think that image is a social construct and it's subjective, it isn't. Now, at the core, let's go back to what happened that evening. The men around the table were very, very intelligent men. Far more intelligent and experienced than I was. The lady I had on my arm was very, very attractive. She wasn't very, very smart. She did not need to be smart. The reason is because at the core, what men really care about is how the woman looks naked. We don't care about your degrees and your qualifications. We don't care about your father's wealth. We don't care about the languages you speak. When we see you, our natural instinct is to imagine what you look like naked. And generally, like I explained in the prior sessions, the way the group judges a woman's beauty is not based on a subjective perspective of one person. It's usually a uniform or an aggregate perspective of the group. So, if everyone in the group says she's very attractive, and I bet she looks good naked, and what a lucky boy he is, that is the group consensus. Automatically, the group elevates you to a position where they say, he has a better taste in women. Now, rightly or wrongly, they say he has a better taste or a good taste in women. He's young, he's junior, but at least he knows how to choose. So, give him a chance. And that was what I was gifted with. Now, I've used this example or this story simply to illustrate that beauty matters. When you walk down the street, men are looking to see what's on your arm. Who are you with? Most of the time, it's better to be without anyone than to have someone who is grossly overweight or someone who is fat, thick, BBW, on your arm. Because the woman on your arm elevates, depreciates, or does nothing to your perceived value. Is this right? And is this the right way to judge people? This is not a moral conversation. We're talking about animal instincts. Generally speaking, in every man's innate makeup, we think about procreation and spreading our seeds. We want to mate with as many beautiful women as we can. And beauty, rightly or wrongly, is a shortcut in men's minds to fertility. We talk about the hip to waist ratio. We talk about the height to weight ratio. A few other things I've also suggested in the sessions thus far. Now, I'd like you to park that story to one side, and let me give you a different story. Some time ago, my younger brother visited Liverpool. And whilst he was in Liverpool, he sent me a message and he said, "There's something strange." And I said, "What?" And he said, "I'm looking at two men who have gone past me in the last 10 minutes, not together, two separate units. Both were with women, both were pushing prams, and the women were huge." I said, "Overweight." And the looks on the men's faces was desperation, frustration, and a feeling of sadness. And he said to me, now recognize, at this point in time, he had never been to Liverpool. So it was his first time, and he said, is this Liverpool? Is this what Liverpool has to offer? Now, let me put some context to my brother's experience. My brother has spent most of his time in cities where you have the most attractive women. And so going to Liverpool for the first time was a bit of a shock. So I responded, I said, well, it depends. Generally speaking, I would assume that those women you saw were very attractive, physically fit, when they were still youthful, and certainly before they got pregnant. But generally speaking, once a man has had a baby through a woman's gift, or they're married, women become complacent. There's no reason to strive or to labor for what they already have, which is the relationship, and therefore they get large, and men generally have been bullied into not expressing what they really wish to have in a spouse, and therefore they just go along for the ride and hope that something will change. So my response to him was in two parts. It depends. If these were the women who they once knew as youthful, young, sexy, hot, then certainly they've been dealt a very bad hand, because it's similar to a missale of a product. On the other hand, if this were women that the man met in their current size, and they have simply increased marginally to what they are presently, then the men have themselves to blame. Now, the point of the two stories is to bring together the conversations I've had over the last, I think, 4 or 5 separate sessions. Now, at the core is a simple analogy which I'd like to use, which is cars. Women and cars. We can't compare both, but we can analyze cars and use the reference to how we interact with cars and to understand our interactions with women. Now, let me say a few things. Generally speaking, men, we drive the cars that we can afford. And I'll use myself as a very good example. My very first car was one I bought in cash. It was a used car. I remember very, very clearly. I had to drive to another city with a friend, paid in cash. My friend inspected the car with me, looked at the papers, looked at the documents. The car had 2 prior owners. I was the third. All the paperwork was intact. I drove the car. It drove well, but I could see that he didn't drive in a comparable fashion to a well-maintained car. This was reflected, of course, in the price I paid. And subsequently, I went to a service station, had it checked, had it serviced, and got it back to optimum form. And I used that car for a while before I traded the car for something else. Now, the point of this is I bought a car that I could afford to own. Generally speaking, most men drive cars that they can afford to own. Now, you have to go back in time because there have been changes. Today, people can lease beautiful cars. Most of that was not available at the early stages of my young adult life. You couldn't just lease a brand new car. You didn't have the credit, you didn't have the experience, you didn't have the salary. It's all changed today. But the same principle applies. Cars generally fall into 2 groups: used cars and new cars. The used car category includes cars generally that have been pre-owned, cars that are damaged, cars that are salvaged, or just simply second-hand cars. So you have different groups. The new category are simply new. They have not been used, they have not been owned, they are not damaged, they are not second-hand, and by heavens, they are not salvaged. They're new cars. Now, for most people who have not had the experience of owning or driving a new car, it's hard to express that these are 2 worlds apart. Now, let me bring this analogy back to women. Men, generally speaking, we are with women based on their beauty and based on our ability to afford such beauty. Generally speaking, women are with men that they are able to attract with their beauty and keep with their femininity, attitude, behavior, mannerisms, and decorum. In the dating marketplace, most men simply want to drive a car. In the marriage marketplace, men want to own a car. Irrespective of what marketplace you find yourself, it's a natural experience and desire for a man to want the best looking car. The reason most people drive Fords rather than Aston Martins is because very few can truly afford Aston Martins. Now, I've always used a litmus test for affordability. The litmus test is as follows. In order for you to own a car, you need to be able to buy the car 3 times over. That is the litmus test. If you can't afford to buy the car 3 times over, and let's say you can only afford 2 times over, then you're carrying a load that is perhaps too heavy for your neck. You should be able to afford 3 times over. What that simply means is that if you wreck the car, you buy another car. On the other hand, if you buy a car, and in this case, I'm not talking about leased cars or insured cars, where the insurance company pays for the replacement. I'm talking about buying out the car outright. If you cannot afford to pay the car 3 times over, and you have an injury or an accident, most people do what? They defer back to a smaller car, a cheaper car, which just simply says you couldn't afford the car originally. Effectively, you were not living within your means. Now, this brings me back to the whole issue about image. At the core of what we're talking about today is fat women, and the fact that over the last 20 years, there's been an erosion of beauty standards to the point where today most men are being told that you're misogynistic and you're fat shaming, you hate women, or you're bashing women simply for stating our standards. If I went to a pub and I said I love Aston Martins, people would simply say that's your preference. If I go to the pub and I say, well, I really, really prefer slim, young, attractive, hot women, those who do not fall within that category would say, you're sexist, you're misogynistic, you hate women, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. How dare you? How dare you have a preference? In any case, a preference is a preference. It may not be for everyone, which is partly why we have a value system. Not everyone can get into Harvard. Not everyone can get into an Ivy League school. Not everyone can get into Eton. Not everyone qualifies to be first class. Not everyone can be a pilot. Not everyone can be an engineer. There are rules and standards in every single area of value in our economic system, health system, and our social network. So, having said that, the analogy of a woman to a car is as follows. Women rank in beauty on a scale. We call that scale by several references. One of them is the sexual marketplace value, or your sexual market value, SMV. It goes from 0 all the way up to 10. It's objective because it means you can compare people irrespective of their incidental attributes. Someone who is a 10 is considered to have the highest value based on beauty and attractiveness. Now, there are other standards, like your reproductive fertility value, your economic intrinsic value, or your non-sexual marketplace value. But when it comes to men, we're visual first. We judge you based on what we see. More importantly, we judge you based on what we think you will look like naked. And this is, I know it's rather crass and sad, and women might think this is wrong. I have found that one of the best ways to deal with life, if you want to have a fulfilled experience, comes in 3 steps. Firstly, see things as they are, not how you would want them to be. So, recognize things as they are. Number 2, identify what is within your control and what you can change. And similarly, identify what is out of your control and what you cannot change. Number 3, Focus on what you can control. Ignore what you cannot control. Now, at the core of this is you can't change people, so men will always be men. Now, in the same categorization, women who are fat, obese, overweight, carrying too much excess weight, BBW thick, the similar analogy will be damaged cars. Now, damaged cars are normally cars that have had accidents. Salvage cars are cars who have had some very, very serious accidents and therefore are used primarily as spare parts. Second-hand cars are cars that have been used by other people, which can still be used. Now, the reason fat women are considered damaged is because if you go back to the comment I made about a person's worth and the importance of recognizing that in this life that we call a journey, we only get one body. One body, we don't get an upgrade, but we get one body. Anyone who decides that they will put the worst amounts and types of ingredients into this body, treat it very badly, in other words, do everything that you shouldn't do to this one body, we would say if that body was replaced by a car, it would be no different from someone saying, well, this particular car is a diesel car, but I, as the person who drives the car, I do not like diesel. I drink orange juice. And so therefore, I am going to put orange juice in the car. I'm going to run the car into a wall. I'm going to have people smoke, put dirt in the car. I'll make sure I don't wash the car. We will say that the person is damaging the car. And therefore, the car's value will depreciate much faster. And very likely, there's a good possibility that at some point, that car will be damaged and no longer worthy of being on the road, no longer road worthy, and therefore will become salvaged. The same principle applies with human beings. The people who do not take health and well-being seriously run the risk that, all things remaining equal, you will be exposed to a higher risk of death, pain, sufferings, and all the other list of health concerns that the professionals have informed us about. If you go beyond the recommendations of the doctors and the physicians and the nutritionists, we say that you must be damaged. Let's put aside the exceptions, those who have existing health genetic issues, those who have, say, thyroid, which we say is a very small percentage. Most overweight issues in society today are made based on people's preferences and choices. So we will say, compared to the same car, you're damaged. Now let's bring it back to men and how we choose. Generally speaking, most men, given a choice, if I came to you as a man and I said, money is not an option, but we want you to choose a car. Over there you have an Aston Martin, say DB11, and over there you have a damaged and a used Jaguar. You get to pick. Most men will not choose intentionally a car that is damaged, or a car that is salvaged, or a car that is second-hand if the alternative is a brand new car, and if it costs them no extra money. So, if a man is dating you as a woman, and you are fat, overweight, obese, BBW, thick, or you're perhaps 20% above your ideal weight. And I gave an example of what that should be. To make it very simple, for those who have not seen the previous sessions, your ideal weight in kilograms is exactly your actual height in feet. If you're 55, 5'5", then you should weigh 55 kilograms. That's simple. If you're 5'2", you should weigh 52 kilograms. Now, I make some adjustments. For those who are 5'4" and below, I say deduct another 3 kilograms, because the shorter you are, the less you can carry extra weight. The taller you are, the more you can carry extra weight. So for taller people, 5'6" and above, we add an extra 3 kilograms. That gives you a tolerance on both sides, but you have a formula. If you're 20% above your ideal weight, you're certainly overweight. If you're 10% over your ideal weight, you are certainly overweight. Men, generally speaking, all things remaining equal, ceteris paribus, we do not choose damaged cars, salvaged cars, second-hand cars over new cars. Now this brings me to the point I started with, which was my first car. I drove my first car for a number of years, and the time came when I could afford more. And lo and behold, when things started working much better for me, the first question I asked myself was, why am I still driving this old car? And what occurred to me was how many people had seen me in this car. Now, one part of my brain simply said, you can afford better, newer versions. So it's time to upgrade. Another part of me said, well, yes, you can, but would that be a financially intelligent decision? So my rational brain and my logical brain got into battle with my emotional brain. The point being, I got to a point where I realized that it was time for an upgrade. Therefore, the reason why size matters is for the following reasons. Generally, and let me address men. Men who date women who are fat, younger men especially, and let me be more specific because I separate men into two specific groups, 18 to 35 and 35 and above. 18 to 35 is the prime years for sowing the seeds. You're not at your place of resting. You're in the preparation ground for your destination. So between 18 years and 35 years, you focus like a laser, you identify your goals, identify your dreams, and you work towards financial freedom. From 35 and above, you have now qualified, providing you have been studious, you've qualified to be able to afford whatever car you want. Between 18 and 35, you make do with what's available. You dedicate only 5% to such activities. 35 and above, you can decide at that point that you want something more attractive, long-term, family-oriented, and certainly you can afford more of a broad range of choices. So for men generally, the reason why size matters is if you're dating a woman who is overweight and fat and probably weighs more than you, height adjusted, you're being very dishonest with yourself. The reason is simply because if given the option, if you could afford more, you would go for something better. Now for the woman, I hate to say this to you, but if you're overweight, if you're fat, if you're thick, BBW, if you believe that it's all about empowerment, you will be disappointed. Not today, maybe not tomorrow. At some point, the man in question will come into his place, his manhood, where money becomes something that he uses as a utility, and therefore he can afford more. And I have seen this countless times where men do what men do, which is they upgrade. Now, I gave in yesterday's session a litmus test. I said, between 18 and 35, and the younger the man is, the less likely he can afford a very attractive woman, because beauty has a price. The older he is, and more likely if he is above 35, the higher the likelihood that he has come into his manhood. So if he is dating you for the first time and he's above 35, then there's a possibility that he knows what he is doing, because it means he can afford any woman. And he's chosen you. So the likelihood of being disappointment is slightly less, because that might be his preference. I also said you must qualify this with the following. If he's 35 and above, it's possible he's a chubby chaser, meaning he just likes fat women. Now, you might be happy with that man. It could also be the man has money, but he has very low self-esteem or sense of self. Or he's not being checked by his group. He doesn't have a network who say to him, something is off, something is odd. She's a bit too heavy for you. And that is something to keep in mind. The younger the man is, I don't care what he says and how much he professes his love to you. He hasn't come into his manhood, and he hasn't actually tasted wealth or money, influence, fame, or notoriety. One of the litmus tests is always the same. If you gave him £1 million and deposited that in his savings account, and you elevated his salary, so he was earning, say, £270,000 or £170,000, to keep things simple, after tax, would he date you? Would he be with you? Now, I understand that a woman's value is much more than her physical beauty and attractiveness. Her intrinsic value is much more than that. I get that. I agree. What I am saying, in the dating marketplace, all men care about is sex. In the marriage marketplace, what men really care about is legacy. And amongst the two specific criterion that men use in both marketplaces, the dating marketplace criteria being your S&V, and the marriage marketplace criterion being S&V and RFV, your reproductive fertility value. Those two sets of criterion point to one important characteristic: youth, beauty, and weight play a major role in how men choose. The smaller you are, the higher the likelihood that childbearing will be easier for you with no complications. The more attractive you are, the more appealing you are to a wide range of men, both in the dating marketplace and in the marriage marketplace. Now, the summary of today's session, therefore, is as follows. Choose your associations very carefully. One of the reasons I've spent some time laboring on this topic is simply to say, men should be honest and state what you want and state where you are. I have often found that most people end up being other people's leftovers. The person who bought my car, my first car, obviously thought they were getting a great deal. I had used the car very badly. I knew the car was no way in as good a shape as it was when I bought the car. The person who bought my car got my seconds. I just hoped they were not making a purchase that was going to last them their entire life, because the car certainly was not deserving of that task. Most people get people seconds. The reason I recommend to men to avoid dating fat women is because simply there's a dishonesty in that process from day one. The man is simply saying, you will do for now, but when I can upgrade, you're toast. The woman, sadly, being emotional, believes that she's been chosen for her true beauty, her inner beauty, without realizing, no, he's driving the car that he can afford. He's with you because that's all he can afford. And most of the time, sometimes the woman, not always, most of the time, the woman is funding that relationship. On the other hand, it's important to recognize the fatter you are, the more likely you are his seconds. Now, let me just spin it around, because when I converse, I'm talking specifically to men. This is a man's channel, intended for men. Generally speaking, the advice is one that women can do with. So let me spin it around very carefully so women can also understand how this will play in the reverse role. I say to men normally, do not marry women who are 35 and above, who you've just met and started dating. Enjoy the experience, but if she's 35 and above, you are not her first choice. You are not her second choice. You are not her third choice. 35, she's desperate if she wants to have kids and a family, and therefore she's ready to settle. She would choose anyone that comes along. She would hope that the person who comes along is a dream and a soulmate, dream man and soulmate. But if she was able to choose, it shouldn't have taken until 35. And therefore for men, I say, if you're out in a dating marketplace or marriage marketplace and you meet a lovely woman and she's 35, run. Enjoy the experience, but don't take it seriously. The reason being is you will never find out whether you are truly her first choice. And the odds really say that you are not her first choice. And in fact, she recognizes that the year after that is when geriatric pregnancy begins, and she doesn't have time. She wants to start a family. So in many ways, you're the person who's going to get that dream fulfilled. And strangely, the way people have buyer's remorse, it wouldn't be unusual for her to have the child, 2 years down the line simply say, well, I have the family that I thought I was never going to have. I have the children that I was always desired, but I never really, really wanted you. And now the desire has been satisfied. I can choose. And quite frankly, I don't like you as much as I like myself. And even if I can't find someone else to replace you, I'm happy all by myself. Can you see the similar relationship between men choosing women who are overweight and being dishonest, and women who are 35 and above choosing men and professing their love and also being dishonest? Now this brings me to today's close. In the dating marketplace, the pursuit of sex is like war. It's a zero-sum game. In the marriage marketplace, we're meant to use good faith. Unfortunately, our selfish interests dominate the rule of being honest and steadfast and coming to the table in good faith. Therefore, whoever plays the game selfishly, or putting their self-interest, perhaps a better word, putting their self-interest first, usually wins. So to both parties, men and women, have the openness and the freedom to say what you really, really want. Put your honest thoughts on the table. Talk about what you like. Talk about what you will not tolerate. And if it works, it works. In conclusion, I said in yesterday's session, if she doesn't change to get you, she will not change to keep you. as we know, with all good aphorisms, they always have opposites. If she changes to get you, she will resent you if she keeps you. At the core of both aphorisms is a saying by someone quite wise. I believe it was Alvin Toffler or Eric Hoffer, one of the two. He said, people do not resist change. People resist being changed. Therefore, my principle has always been this. The best gift I can give you is a healthy, happy me. And therefore, I will take care of me for you, and you take care of yourself for me. The benefit of being healthy and living a good lifestyle is for yourself. The byproduct, whether you're male or female, the byproduct of that decision that the person makes, or rather the residual value, comes to you. So a woman who is dating me who is overweight should not change for me. She should do so for herself. I get some of the byproduct or the benefit. Similarly, a man should aspire and strive to be as productive as he can be, as wealthy as he can be, as successful as he can be, as generous as he can be for himself. The byproduct of that is he gets to share that experience with a woman, with friends, and with family. Now, I hope today's session has been useful.